So maybe we'll start by introducing ourselves so you have a context for where we've all ended up. I'm Kat Brown, and I did my second year practicum last year at the Vanderbilt Counseling Center for Students, and that's where I am working now. I'm a triage therapist on an AOD program for students who got in trouble for drinking.
And I'm Katherine Johnson-Burbidge, and also we all graduated last year, we already said that. And I'm actually at the Sexual Assault Center as a clinical therapist, and I really love it there. And I'm also working with Katie. So, Katie, bye.
I'm Monica Ernest, and I work at Meharry part-time in the Family Community Clinic, and I'm a social worker counselor there. So I do clinical work, research, and I actually get to teach the medical students a class as well on anxiety and depression, so that's pretty cool. And I also work part-time at a small counseling firm named Symmetry.
My name's Sarah Cadden, and I work at Genesis Academy, which is a behavioral school for kids with special needs. And so I'm one of the staff therapists there.
My name is Paige Harris, and I work for Guardian Home Care and Hospice. And I do about 32 hours home health and then 8 hours hospice. And go into the home and see a lot of different things. I'm sure you all have too, but it's good. I enjoy it.
I'm Jennifer Morgan. I work at Middle Tennessee Mental Health Institute, it's the state psychiatric hospital. I'm a psychiatric social worker there. I do a lot of assessments of the patients that come in. I work with the psychiatrist and on the treatment team, decide if and when the patient's going to be discharged, help with the discharging planning process, and also do group therapy with the patients there.
So maybe we'll start with your questions. Yeah.
Kind of a hypothetical, realistic question. I get testing anxiety, especially knowing that it's time as well. And comps are important, but say I've got A's all the time I've been here and I failed comps both times. Am I not granted my very much earned degree over one test?
So the question is, if you were to fail comps twice, despite your grades, would you then fail? That, to my mind, may be more of an administrative question than we can answer fully. I'm not sure about the administrative side of it. I can say that in the prep that we did last year, we learned that, it's, first of all, extraordinarily rare to fail it enough times that you would not pass. You're given a number of opportunities, but that also, everyone here is always so great about working with students to talk to you about that. If you have that concern, that would be my blanket answer.
Yeah. I mean, and that if you have made straight A's, that's a really good sign that you probably will not fail comps twice. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Have they already explained to you how it's graded?
Yes.
Yeah? Are you clear on that? So there's multiple people that will read your answer, and then their scores will be averaged together to give you a score per answer. And then if you were to fail all of them, which would be probably pretty rare because that's a lot of people saying that you didn't know how to answer the question, that's probably not going to happen. When you retake it, you only retake the ones that fell below the score. So you still have, the second time, you have the full 8 hours, but you only have to redo the ones that had too low of a score. Does that make sense? And if that helps.
Yeah.
That was comforting to me.
And I have test anxiety, so it just really helped me a lot just to keep reviewing right beforehand and really almost sort of figure out an hour, like what I was going to do each hour, and really have to stick to it. Really had a big clock up and just really kind of kept reminding myself, okay, you got to keep moving along, don't. So just, time can be your friend in many respects. So just, do some guided imagery and mindfulness breathing, get a good night's sleep the night before, make everybody in your house, including your dogs, go away, just
Keep snacks around.
Yep, water.
It's also too, once you get into the flow of the test and you really start to get involved with it, you really the anxiety starts to fade a little bit. But once that time clicks, it's a little bit intense, but then once you start going through the case study and I think it kind of starts to dissipate a little bit as you just get more involved and, you know.
And another question, like, I'm a very succinct person. I've heard that you should at least write a page or two per response. What if I really just can get to my point of what I'm gonna do in a paragraph or two, one page?
So to repeat, the question would be that if you are someone who writes short answers typically, you need to make sure you have a certain length. Is that better? Is that right?
Succinct yet thorough. But,
So-
you know, will that count against me that I hit everything in a page, whereas others it may be 2 pages of, you know, redundant?
So I think, again, from last year, my remembrance of kind of some of the stuff we talked about is that really the most important thing is to answer everything, is to really make the point. And that the only thing that you could really be penalized for would be to not answer at all. From what I remember, that was kind of the thing that was stressed to us the most. You know, because it's so comprehensive and because, you know, especially if you've done well and you know the stuff pretty well, you always have something to say. And there's very little chance you won't have any way to respond. So I think probably just being able to get it down, it doesn't, you know, whether it's a page or 2 pages, I think it's more of a question about your management of time. I think you would probably want to try to stick to more like a page than 2, simply because you don't have enough time to really go much beyond that. But as long as you answer the question and demonstrate that you have a grasp of the concepts it's trying to elicit, I think that's the most important thing. And that not answering is far worse than answering in a way that's not your typical style.
Something else I wanted to pick up on with your first question of what happens if you don't pass some questions. And last year, there were a couple of questions that I didn't pass that I had to redo. Now the thing is, it's unfortunate if you don't have certain questions that you have to redo, but the good thing is that you have several days between the time of when you find out that you have to redo some questions and when you have to redo and submit those questions, that you can put together a new answer. And you can do that over several days. So when you go in to take the test or redo the test that morning and re-answer those questions, all you have to do is go in, log into the test, and then cut and paste your answer that you've been working on over the last few days, and just go ahead and submit it. So, you know, so you have plenty of time to redo those questions if you have to. So the goal is to pass all the questions and not have to redo any of them. But worst case scenario is if you have to review those questions, then you've got a lot of time to think about the question, how you want to word it, how you want to construct it, and then just cut and paste it into the exam in the morning that you have to redo it.
Because the questions don't change.
Yeah, the questions don't change. And it's still the same case scenario too.
Jennifer, did they tell you what you did wrong or where you lost the way on the question?
Yeah, you get feedback.
Okay.
You get feedback from whoever's grading your exam. It's like, well, you said this, but we're looking for this, or yeah. So you get feedback. So you take that feedback into consideration and think, oh, okay, now I know what to say, and then you just resubmit the question.
I have a question about how long your answers are. The question will say blah, blah, blah in A, B, C, D, E. Like if you had all of those letters, there's no way you will be able to do that in like less than half of a page, just if you give one sentence per bullet point they're asking for.
So
So-
one sentence is
I mean, that would,
acceptable.
well, that would be like the very, very minimum, but even if you did the very, very minimum, you would still easily have, because
Have
the
you guys
questions
gotten-
are very thorough. So
Have
if
you guys gotten sample questions yet? So you see in the structure, like
That's
you
how
say,
they are. So if you answer all of those points,
The other thing
that's
too,
true.
like some questions will be, I think, a little bit more elaborate than other ones that you'll need to really kind of focus on applying the concepts. So like to be safe, instead of just saying, oh, this is this theory, this would apply. You want to elaborate and say, well, how does it really apply to, you know, whatever the case study may be, what parts of the case study apply to this case and how did it apply, instead of, oh, this is the some theory, I don't know, whatever you want to throw out there, but just really kind of elaborate, like a social worker, why does
Pick
it,
one of those theories, any of them.
yeah,
We're graduates.
why does
Put it out
it,
there.
like, you know,
This is
really
the
think of
strengths
how it
perspective.
applies and think like you would a social worker, how you would apply it, and I think you'll find that you'll start to just naturally write more on your own about that specific concept, but.
I think my shortest answer was 3 pages.
Oh, no.
And it was double spaced. It's double spaced. I mean, really, when you think about
That's like a page
it,
and a half. Yeah, that's about normal.
I actually, to speak to that a little bit, so I think some of the best advice I received was actually from Kate Chapin before comps. And she was just saying, now keep in mind that what we're grading on is not the most perfect essay. It's not how succinct you can be to get to a point. What we're looking at is if we could go inside this person's head when they're out practicing social work, how do we think their head is working? How do we think they're performing? How do they think through what they should be thinking about when they meet a client? Do they think through, policy issues when they're thinking through this stuff? So what they're not looking for the perfect essay. So they're not looking for it to be really short. They're looking to see what you would do if that came up in your work and you were just able to write out exactly your thought process. So I think that kind of helps in terms of thinking about how you would elaborate, because you would elaborate differently if you're really explaining your thought process than you do in an essay. Does that make sense?
That's very helpful.
And I think it's okay too to write like how you would think it, like
Yeah.
instead of just trying to come up with this perfect, like a thesis and a perfect essay, you kind of like write like, well, I would do this in this situation. It's not, it's not about, well, spelling you have to worry about some, well, maybe not, but, just, it's really just like how you would what you would do as a social worker. It's not so much like having the perfect starting sentence and the thesis and the starting paragraphs, and it's really exactly like just writing down your mind is exactly like what you said.
Yeah, I mean, if it helps to think of it this way, I actually wrote several times within my essays, I would be thinking about this. So you're truly not writing an essay. You're showing the reader, here's what I would think about, here's what my thought process would be when a client came in like this.
So why don't we get another question? I see a couple of hands. You go first.
We've kind of been advised that we shouldn't read a case study from previous years. So how would you guys recommend us finding ways to kind of apply the questions into like a scenario, since we can't use a case study?
That's a good question.
That's a good question. So one thing, I don't know if you guys are looking into studying groups, but one thing that we did last year was to get together in groups, and we did use a case study, but you could just as easily sort of come up with one. And if you have sample questions and you can think of it, you can sort of devise a broad outline of a scenario in which those questions might be asked. You can then, one thing that we did, I'll say, is that we then, each member, and a few of us were all in the same group, each member would take 1 week, and in that week they'd present on that question based on the case study we were at the time using, but you could just as easily devise one. Because again, the idea isn't so much your thorough knowledge of that case study, but rather how well can you answer this set of questions about policy or neuroscience or trauma as applied to pretty much any situation. So, I don't know if there's a way to find sample case studies online that aren't from here or from previous years, but I do think that method was really helpful to just use any case study or any background information, but then using that to just think through what the questions are asking and how to answer it. Does that make sense? Does that answer the question?
I'll say, yeah, we watched a movie, and then we've already gone through each question individually, but just trying to if we have the knowledge, it's just applying it to a study, which I think is personally what I'm getting caught up on, because I'm like, I can write all about it, but then when I'm applying it specifically to a study, I'm like, what's a good way where I can kind of touch all these points, and any advice on where I could find anything?
Well, and I know that there have been, one of the things we talked about last year was that in a couple of our classes, I remember in the one who we usually refer to it by an abbreviation, cultural, that one. There are a number of case studies that you're given in class that are pretty broad, and I think if you're just looking to pick a case study from which you can draw, if it's one that's got, a lot of rich information, that might be a good place to start, is just using one that you've used before for a class and then trying to apply those questions to it where you can. Because really, again, it's really about making sure you can answer those questions fully as applied to any situation. So it might even be helpful to have, use case scenarios from past courses, that that are different, but that you're using to answer the questions. What do you guys think?
I also think it's really important though, we broke up each, we had group members and each group member took one question and really got all the tools from the last 2 years that, so policy analysis, there's certain steps to do an analysis. So you have all those steps to an analysis so you can, regardless of what the case study is, you can apply that. And since it's open book, you can just, take the different, or what do you do to conceptualize a case? Well, regardless of the case study, you're always going to do these steps to conceptualize a case, and then you can apply it to whatever the case study is. So you've got your outline of what you need to do for each question, so just kind of gathering all the information from all of your notes from the last 2 years, your Blackboard, PowerPoints, and all that stuff, and just kind of make a general way of how you could answer the question based on, the definitions of certain things and outlines of how you would go about doing them. But
in our group, we also, someone in our group, neither of us, figured out each question correlates to a class that you've had so far. And so if you look at the syllabus for that, all of those classes and the competencies that you never read on the first day of class, those competencies answer the questions. So if you look through what you were supposed to have learned in the class, then that correlates to the bullet points. What you definitely learned, or thinking about right now, I'm sure, those are those bullet points. They match up, and so that can help you if you have all of that. That can help you to organize. That helped us, although we weren't the ones that thought of that, I don't think.
It also did help with dividing out those questions, taking the 10 questions and then getting together as a group and one person take one question or another person take another question, or one person take 2 questions, another person take 2 questions, because it's a lot of information to put together just on your own. If you can get together in a group and divide up those questions and then everyone individually bring their information together and share it, that's really the best way to go.
And it really helped because we were sort of presenting to one another, and it was sort of like we were teaching each other again. And then we had all those materials with us because we helped each other think through the questions together. That is a really good way to do it.
And I would just recommend definitely printing out the case study right away and just say, okay, I'm going to spend a half an hour understanding all the nuances of it. There's going to, in any case study, there's some material that you don't necessarily have to, like the sweater was blue. You don't need to know that, So just, focus on the real facts and the things that you need to know. And, of course, hone in on all the social work stuff that you need to be really in tune with.
And kind of mark it up. It helps. As you read it, it'll be something will be clear, this relates to trauma, this relates to advocacy or ethics, and mark it where I did as we went through it. And then when you get to that question, you will be drawn to that area of the case study because it's pretty lengthy. You won't have time to read it multiple times throughout the test. So it helps if you kind of, right? Did y'all know?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And just so everybody does understand, the case study is lengthy. It's not like a paragraph. It's
3 pages.
Yeah.
Maybe no more.
And a lot of components to it, so it will help you to kind of organize it the first time you go through it, so that you can refer back to it easier.
But the nice thing is there's not, were you going to say that you don't have to pick one direction. It kind of gives you the option to go a couple different ways with it. Neither one is going to be wrong, You can kind of make it how you see it. We all view things differently, so you can kind of take it and run with it however you want to.
Yeah, there are so many right answers within the case study. And then, so the length is intimidating, but it's also filled, and you were touching on this, it is filled with details like she had on a blue sweater. So keeping in mind, okay, get out, that does not even come into play here. And just remembering to really focus on what's important. Because it's filled with stuff to make you, think about other stuff, and you don't have to.
Well, I think you make a good point. I started with width of the 4 pages. It's better to know now. A lot of people didn't account for that time to read and do what they said, which would be fluff trauma, fluff ethical dilemma, research policy. because a lot of people I've heard that actually do take 30 minutes to an hour to actually read and break it down and cognitively start to separate, versus people that are like, I did not know it was going to be 4 pages long, and you know that going in, you don't fumble the first hour because you plan to save that time accordingly.
Yeah.
To cognitively pull out those details and get away from them. Because it's kind of like, when I was reading the one last year for theirs, it almost seemed like when I would do a client intake assessment, and I'm like redirecting them back to like, let's go back to your family, you know, she wears blue sweater, look. That's we'll talk about that, but a lot of what we're dealing with as an assessment is to filter out the imperative nature of the clinical case.
Next question, another question?
Do you guys ever have to, or when you did it, did you have to ever make up details or information history to answer the question at all? Or was it all right there?
So I'll repeat that again for the video. But so the question is if you have to make up any details. The answer is you do. You do not. So part of what I was just thinking when they were talking about the length of the case study, it does sound intimidating, but I think it's also important to remember that it's asking you about a comprehensive breadth of knowledge. So it has to be long. I mean, it can't just be about a client. It isn't just going to be about a client. It's also going to be about policy level and about advocacy. And, you know, it's going to be about, it's going to try to cover all the bases of everything you've been learning for the past 2 years. So the one thing it will not be is short on information. You won't have to fill in anything. And again, it's not to be intimidating. It really, I think I felt, and I think everyone else said, we've talked about it a lot, that it really did a good job of weaving all those things together. The case study that we had, or the question that we had, was designed to ask about each of those really important pieces. And again, talk about things from every single class you've looked at. So you won't have to fill anything in. And again, it won't be about kind of writing a beautiful narrative or writing an essay that's really, you know, grammatically perfect or even structurally perfect. It's really about saying, okay, this question is clearly asking me about trauma. I've outlined the part of the case study where trauma is clearly identified, and I want to be able to show that I have competency in the ability to talk about how trauma affects someone across their life. And what a social worker might do if they are treating someone who's been affected by trauma. So it's really going to be very broad. You won't have to focus on real details as much, but rather you'll be doing the opposite. You'll be applying little details in the story to something bigger that you've learned in class. Does that sound about right?
I would say even if you find yourself wanting to make up details, that kind of, I can remember taking it and thinking there were times when you almost could feel like you wanted to make up details, and that's actually a sign that you're going a little too far into it, and really that's a place where you could cut it and say, you know, hypothetically this could potentially go in this direction. In your mind you're thinking that, you know, that it could go in this direction, but that's not what it's asking, so I'm just going to answer what it is actually asking. So if you find yourself wanting to make up details, you could be kind of overthinking some of it.
So there are things that you could make up, I guess, or for lack of a better term, are, you know, like if you would say, oh, they may have an attachment disorder because of the information that they gave here. Like you could, you know, like you would say this concept, well, I guess that's what the whole thing is about anyhow, but, you know, okay, they have a problem with relationships, then you would say, okay, well, you could put in this person likely has an attachment disorder. Like those are things, they give you the details, you just get to apply what you believe.
Yeah.
Whereas what you don't want to do is say, if this person were reacting like this instead, that would indicate that they have an attachment disorder. You know what I mean? You don't want to fill in unnecessarily just to use the word attachment disorder. You want to just take what they've given you and then exactly try to apply it to something, you know, broader.
And I feel like that was it, to go along with the whole, if you find yourself trying to do that a little bit, then you're going too far. It's also to think to yourself, okay, this I would do a thorough assessment. So part of it is answering by simply saying, in this case, I would realize I need to assess further. And that's a good answer. That's, you know, showing that you're thinking like a social worker.
or do
Or
this.
seek supervision.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right, exactly.
Key,
Exactly,
you know.
Never hurts to seek supervision.
Yeah.
You can put that in every question at some point. And then I want to talk to my supervisor.
Follow the code of ethics. Right.
Yes.
Right.
According to the code of ethics and seek supervision, just
Keep the code
layer
of
those
ethics
in there.
with you.
That's
That's
the last of everyone.
Yeah, exactly.
Covered.
I had,
yeah,
I had
that
them
was-
printed out,
That
all
was
of my
something we did,
cabinets
yeah.
above my PC.
We kept the code of ethics with us through every single study group, and then
I
next
still
to us
do, and I'll lock it.
Yeah. You do?
And I'll lock it.
Okay, yeah.
This is along those lines, and not to minimize the test at all, but would you say that a lot of it is using like the jargon that they're looking for and give them what they want kind of stuff? Because that's kind of how these kind of tests feel to me. I know a lot of it is showing your process of what you would think, and that's really important, but using those like keywords that we've covered so many times in so many of our classes, would you say that's a pretty important part of it, or?
So I won't repeat that one because you're close enough to the computer. I'm sure they heard. So I would say that you want to focus on the jargon or the terminology insofar as it's important. Insofar as those are actually, if you've heard the word psychosocial 8,000 times, you've heard the word trauma 8,000 times, you know, those key words are, yes, I think you do want to focus on them, but not because they're what the readers want to hear, because those are the foundations of the work you're about to be doing in the real world. So I would answer a yes, kind of. I mean, but the purpose of using that language is not to please the readers. They're not out there to get pleasure from reading your comps. You know, what they want to know is that you truly grasp the concept behind it and why it's a social work value and a social work principle rather than just a piece of, you know, a word that you've heard a lot and that you happen to know something about. I do think that if there are words that you've heard 1,000 times that we repeated over and over again, like psychosocial theory, that's probably a good sign that it's something you want to know very, very well and be able to speak knowledgeably about on the comps. But I do think that it's about remembering that if you've heard it a lot of times, it's because it's a foundation of what you're being tested on. And they want to see, I mean, I'm going to use the word comprehensive again at the risk of sounding nerdy, but it is true that they want to see that you've got, not just that you know the word psychosocial, but that you know what a psychosocial history of a person is.
Now you know what you're talking about.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, just kind of pick up what Kat was saying is that, yeah, I think it's important to use the jargon, but not too much in that. They're going to be able to pick up if you're using too much. You know, the really main point is read the question very carefully. Answer it very carefully. Make sure that you answered the entire question and you look at that question and break it down piece by piece, because the question isn't just this, you know, please assess this person whether or not they have, you know, problems with their parents or they've suffered from trauma. You know, the question is very long and it has a lot of different parts to it. Make sure that you read it carefully and answer each part of the question. And it's not just filling in jargon out on the paper, but typing out jargon out of the computer. It's answering the question and kind of getting a sense of what are they asking, what are they looking for, what is it that they're really talking about here, and being able to answer that correctly.
You still have to apply everything, you know, like not just taking a keyword. How does the keyword relate to this case still?
And you can write, to answer your question, you can write a lot about something or a little bit accurately, a lot about nothing. Or a lot accurately about something, you know, so it's using the language correctly, because that's I think what you said, to speak to the tangent, making up details and adding all this in. I think you can totally take yourself down this path trying to fill in minor details versus, because if you can explain, like Catherine said, in your mind, we're looking, you know, you think this is an ethical dilemma, and you use Reamer's steps. Well, to you it might be, and to a lot of other people it might be. They might use a different process, but probably everybody calls it ethical dilemma. But how they define that accurately instead of the way, you know. And I don't know if y'all used any of that, you know, but you know how that is.
I think that's a good point too, because it demonstrates that's the difference between if you're presented with a clearly ethical dilemma in one of the questions, which you will be, what you're saying is, Katie, is like the difference between saying, I would use the code of ethics. We know, the code of ethics in an ASW is a big, right, that's a code word, it's a major code
And then
word.
seek supervision.
But then, right, and then seek supervision. There's a difference between doing that and then saying, well, this is an ethical dilemma because, as illustrated by these articles in the Code of Ethics, and here's how I would solve it. I think that's a good example of how
Much
those are two
cleaner,
different
much
things.
clearer
Right, right.
And just to hint, it's always a good idea to use language model. Just forever for the rest of your life. But definitely on this test.
Personally and professionally.
Yeah, personally and professionally, as you seek supervision, use Ringer's model. Definitely
And
on
I
the
think
test.
what our study group did is definitely we had these really nice outline. So you had the real important parts figured out already, what you were going to hit for that answer, regardless of what the case study is. You kind of know what the basis is. So then you just get to fill it in with your wealth of information that you have and speak from yourself.
It's all very helpful, what you're sharing. I appreciate it. And it's helping me to frame my own approach. And what I'm thinking, several things. One, all of us are products of the University of Tennessee. And we hope when we graduate that as we go out into the world, we'll be an asset to the university. And I think all of us also know that social workers serve clients. And oftentimes those clients are vulnerable, they're in crisis, they have great need, and they are due our utmost, most excellent service and competence. So being here in this moment, I'm thinking the exam is more an opportunity for us all to imagine if we were a client going to a social worker and we wanted them, for example, to advocate on behalf of our community, what would we want that social worker to do? We want them to be at the top of their game. What would their thought process be? How would they respond to us in our time of need? Or if we were in an ethical dilemma as a client or any of those things. Basically, if we can imagine the very best social worker that we would want to be advocating for us, serving us, helping us, providing therapy to us, who would that person be? And we write from that perspective.
It's a great way to think about it, yeah. Because you will, that's not actually a hypothetical. In 9 months, that's exactly what you will be doing, And a lot of us work in interdisciplinary, fields, and it is true that, social work is an incredible profession, and, you'll be asked you'll be compared to people in other professions who are doing similar things. And it's, that is a great perspective to take, I think, that you want to write from your best, most professional self,
Do you guys just have any tips for time management? I know you guys said like keeping water and making sure that you are, alone, no dogs, kids, distractions. But anything else that you felt like really helped you sort of move along and not get like bogged down into one question where you felt like you were spending a lot of time there and not in other areas? So, or examples of things that you did that you wish you had done differently as far as time management goes?
Just for the test, as far as our time management?
In life.
I struggle with
It's regular
That's a
things.
whole other hour.
Do I need to restate the question? Or
It's a different panel for the life portion.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Right, so to restate the question, you're asking about just tips for managing your time when you're taking the comps, because of course it's a lot of questions in a little bit of time. We did, because we studied in groups, we spent a lot of time just talking about the practical, about, what logistically, how much time do you need for each question. It is also important to remember, I think you can't be underestimated how important it is to do what they're saying about the first 30 minutes of the comps is you printing that case study immediately, pouring through it, really getting a good idea of what it says, and then looking at all the questions and remembering, okay, if question 6 has 8 different letters underneath of it, and you have to answer all of those things, and question 2 has only 2, then you know that you need to spend more time on question 6 than 2, so you kind of, in your mind, sort of think about how much time do I need to devote to each. I think the great thing that I think some of us found is that once you get going, you get in the groove pretty quickly. You get very, myopic and focused on that task, and so you'll pick up the pace as you go. But having an idea in mind, I think it's really good what you said, Monica, about having your eye on the clock. I used a timer on my phone, and that was really helpful, just to keep myself moving and to remember that, again, it's not about, it'd be really, really stressful to write a really, really beautiful essay in 35 minutes about this question. But it's not that stressful to just get down all the information in 35 minutes. So I think that, again, is a good reminder that it's really, they're not going to be looking for this extraordinary grammar. They're just looking for, is all the information there? And you can do that. That's just a reminder. All these questions can be answered in time. They really can. Don't worry about that if you start to freak out and think there's just no way. It can be done. And so remember that. And then remember that it's just about getting it down. And do some practical things like, don't, keep stuff around and keep a clock or a timer going.
And it is 30 minutes a question, wasn't it?
Well, you
Was it
don't have
30 minutes? Yeah, I remember setting a timer, which it sounds like we all did, and kind of keeping in mind, like you said, if this one has 8 subparts, I'm going to go ahead and allow for more time for that question. And I had actually already written out to myself exactly how much time, like 30 minutes for the case study. I don't remember how I broke down the rest of the time, but however I broke it down, I was really strict about it, and I would set my my iPhone timer, and when it hit 35 or whatever it was I set it for, even if I still had a couple sentences to go, I stopped. I would absolutely stick to my time. And the other thing I allowed was for probably 45 minutes at the end to just make sure I had, not to reread every question and start rewriting anything. Definitely don't do that. But to at least just allow for some time to breathe and just put everything together and do all that. So when I would reach, if my timer went off at 35 minutes and I wasn't quite done with this question, I still moved on and started the next question, started fresh, kept going. That way you're assuring that you're not going to leave any question completely blank. Because even if I did have time to go back to those questions and I answered them fine. Had I not had time to go back, I still probably wouldn't have failed those questions. Whereas if I had actually spent too much time on any one question and not answered a question, I would have failed that question, so.
I also started with the heaviest question first. So I looked through them and I just had 35 minutes per question, but I did the heaviest one first and didn't finish it in the first amount of time because I wasn't in my stride yet. But some of them are shorter and easier and probably in your strengths a little bit more, and you'll be able to knock those out quickly and then use the rest of that time block to go back. That helps me
hardest
a lot.
question first, meaning most complex?
Yeah, the one with the most components to it. I did that one first because I have serious time management issues in all of my life.
I'm gonna say I don't know if you're allowed to take the test here, are you? Still?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm one of 2 people who did that, and I honestly, because I have 2 dogs that are crazy, and I just was one of those worst case, what if my internet goes out? I hate Comcast, so I was like, something is gonna happen, so I actually took it here, and it was kind of nice, it was me and my buddy, and and then Shakita, is she still here? Is she here still or no? Lachita. She always would come in and bring like clementines, and she was like, "This is the best." I know. She was like, "Are you guys okay? You're my babies," So it was. It was really cool, all of that like anxiety and ease to what if my internet went out? You have complete quiet here, and if something happens, it's on the school. It's not on you at that point. So.
And also have your lunch ready. Like don't stop to go eat lunch. I had a super sweet friend deliver it without saying any words, just left it. But have something ready that you can kind of eat as you go. You won't really have time for an official lunch break. Well, you might. You probably will not. Plan to not have that time.
And plan for some awesome self-care afterwards.
Yeah.
We did that. With first job as a social worker, you've got to do something really, and before too, really, I think for some reason getting a good night's sleep was really stress to us. I felt actually a lot of pressure to sleep a lot beforehand, but it was good. But I think that's really important. You don't want to get burned out.
I think it's important to actually remember that if you don't get a good night's sleep before, you're still probably going to be okay. I know that sounds crazy, but it does get stressful when you're like, I have to sleep really well tonight. It's so stressful. Oh my gosh,
And I think the good thing too to remember is you're already in that mode of sitting down for a long period of time and having to read chapters and having to write papers. It's the same thing. It's the same thing of just sitting down and having to work on an assignment or having to read something. You're just doing it a little bit longer. And give yourself a couple minutes to get up, stretch, use the bathroom, get a drink of water. You're already in that mode. You just keep going. Just keep that momentum going. It's the same thing as writing a big term paper or having to crank out a bunch of chapters that you have to read that night. It's the same thing. It's just, this is just a little bit longer process. And give yourself some breaks. Give yourself some breaks and do not panic.
It's lengthy, but your adrenaline kind of keeps you going and focused. And as far as time management, I think you're gonna figure out. We all did it a little different. I went straight through 1 through 10 or whatever it was, but as long as you give yourself that time period, if you go 5 minutes over, you know you've got to make up 5 minutes the next question or something. But just stick to that specific, maybe 40 minutes roughly to each question, and you should be okay. There's not really a set science, I don't think, on it, but just don't spend 2 hours on one question. Yeah.
What were a couple areas or one area that you guys felt you wish you would have done better initially in the front end? I don't know if some of you didn't pass certain areas. Or some specific ones that you had a hard time with.
So to kind of restate that, sounds like you're asking which for each of us was maybe a weaker area that we had to really kind of bone up on a little bit more to get ready.
Remember?
Okay, yeah. Yeah, that's a good question.
I don't remember. I did Sarah's approach to do the hard one first, and then I was working my way to the middle. And I didn't like the middle question at all. I didn't like it in practice. It just wasn't one of those things that you just like really get into. And of course, that's the one I did last. And I only had a little bit of time left. I was like, oh man, why did I do this to myself? So that's, maybe go ahead and knock the one question that you don't want that much out of the way first.
Yeah, that's good.
And are you asking about actually taking the test or preparing? Like, was there an area that you had to prepare more for? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I guess both would be good to know. But yeah, I was talking about taking.
Something I noticed, and I don't know if you guys did too, but we're all in here for different reasons. We all want to do different. Some of you want to work with children, and some with families, and some with A&D, and some with you all want to go in different directions. And so whatever area you want to go in, you probably studied that more closely or carefully. And so probably, unless you're really jazzed about policy, that's what you really want to do, then you probably haven't. That's probably not been your strongest area. But yet it's something that is a broad subject and something that you will be asked about probably. So I think that's knowing yourself is going to be pretty important. That was true for me at least, of just knowing that policy wasn't the area that I wanted to go into. So just naturally, even though we learned all the concepts, I just didn't focus in on it the way that I did the treatment of trauma. And so. So I think if you know yourself, then if this is an area that's you don't gravitate toward naturally, then you probably do want to make sure that you've adequately covered it beforehand, just to make sure you feel totally confident. Because I think your confidence is really important. If you feel, and that goes back to that question about the sort of keywords, or you want to feel confident that you know what psychosocial is and what a policy brief is made of. The more confident you are, the better. The more it's just going to flow when you start writing. So does that answer it? Kind of.
Yes.
That was true for me. What about you guys?
I had a hard time with the research part of it. That's not really my gig. It's not my jam. It's not my jam.
For an example, like I didn't take a trauma class. I took a different elective. I knew Monica had taken it, so she was able to give me some notes so I could prepare that way. So just talk to your friends who are in different electives, and hopefully they'll share and help each other prepare.
And
Use each other.
Definitely. And I went over my books. I think I took 2 days off of my internship just to really just kind of chill at home and start going through my books. And I just would tag things in a book, especially if it was, the leadership book or something. It was just like, are you kidding me? But, just kind of go in there and start tagging it, because you just want to be able to go back and not be nervous when you flipping pages. You want to kind of know, okay, all right, this is number 25. I can't say what number that was. But anyway, something like that, just so that you can visually just go, okay, I'm going to go get that book now. I'm on that question now. So you're not just going all over your desk going, oh, crap, where's that book? So,
Thank you.
I'm going to show you guys one thing before. This is my pride. This is my pride and joy.
She got to take it down off her mantle. That's where she keeps it.
Yeah. So this is just kind of an example. I think we all kind of did something very similar.
Mine
So,
is just it.
like, get your tabs. Like, okay, so there's 10 questions, right? I used to be a 5th grade teacher, so. So there's, so you have 10 questions, so get tabs and get your notes for each item and just put, okay, question 1, code of ethics, and then you've got all your stuff right in that tab so you know where to go for that question. Your classmates can do, you know, whatever notes they give you in your group, you've got it all right there, so just really easy to navigate through in your test if you've got a tab for each
Of the sample question.
each of the sample questions. Got it all
We
right
had some
there.
real type A people in our study group.
Yeah.
Because not all of us are type A.
I mean, I have one too, but somebody else made it for me.
Yeah. Right.
And it did help. It did help.
Save yourself some work and have your classmates.
Do the work for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or divide up.
Yeah, divide up the work. That does help a lot.
Well, let's say like if we were a group, then she would have question 1 and she would make copies for all of us, everything that she did, and then stick it right in there in your tab, and then you're done.
Yeah.
Well, do a little more.
Yeah. It does help to split them up.
Use your own words.
Right. Right.
That is one thing to remember if you guys are studying in groups. Even if you share notes, you know, all of your answers are going to be processed through that software that makes sure, double checks it against every, you know, thousands and thousands of other papers. So you want to be real careful that no matter what, even if you share notes, that you don't answer, you need, of course, code of ethics. You want to be very ethical, but also you just want to just know that it will be very easily caught. So you want to make sure you're using your own language. And
Which just kind of earlier you asked about us using a sample case study. I forgot who asked that. In our group, there was like talk of a pest case study floating around, and we didn't look at it because we didn't want to all have kind of work through that and have in our minds how to answer the questions and then get ourselves in trouble because we've been talking the same way about the specific. We just didn't want to get ourselves in trouble that way if it happened to be the same one. But so it's kind of better to not have any concrete case study in mind. That way your thoughts stay a little bit more individual when you get time to answer it.
Good point. Did you spend time, like, if it's not your, obviously the paper, it's not your site, did you spend a lot of time according to blah, 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 blah? I mean, obviously the code of ethics, but if it's a particular reading, did you say, like, how did you?
Oh, like an article or something?
Yeah.
You're not supposed to.
We didn't.
cite
yeah, so that was one of the things that we, if I recall, one of the, so the question is about citing particular articles or particular authors. Like I remember in trauma, we read a lot of Van der Kolk, so a lot of what we talked about was citing from this researcher, Van der Kolk, but because you're not going to be citing and you don't want to be plagiarizing, it's better to use general terms. I think from what I remember, we were asked not to cite specific authors, except for, Reamer's is very so broad that you don't have to cite a particular work in order to discuss it. So
Or something like the stages of development or something like that if it's already like
or whatever.
yeah,
Right.
but you don't want to like cite a specific article or a specific thing, which makes it easier on you. That's a little less pressure.
And you really don't have time, I think.
Yeah.
You really want to just really crank out your own ideas and and your own answer to that question in your own words rather than having to say, well, according to Van der Kolk says in this article XYZ, you don't really have enough time really to do that. You really just looking at the case study and applying that theory to the case study. So there's really no point in quoting from another theorist or another researcher. Well, research shows in this research that XYZ. You're applying it to the case study. So you're really just using your own words and your own language. And there's really not enough time, or there's really not really any need to really quote anybody else.
Because you wouldn't do that if someone was in your office.
Yeah.
Right.
Let me just pull out this article here about what you have.
And it doesn't mean you're not integrating it into everything you're thinking about. So, I mean, if you're thinking about trauma, obviously you're going to be keeping in mind all these different Van der Kolk articles. But you're not, again, if you're thinking about it in terms of they're trying to read your thought process, you don't need to cite your thought process.
I remember having
knowing what you read.
I had a hard time accepting that because I was thinking, well, this is an evidence-based program. Aren't I supposed to have evidence to support, what I'm writing about, but it's
weird to change.
it is, but that's not how you're writing the comps, I guess.
And I think it's important to remember
Makes
this
sense.
is not a test about how well you can cite.
Right.
It's a test about how well you have learned the basic general ideas about treatment of families or the treatment of
What you
and
have
how
in your
can
head.
apply it. Yeah, what's in your head.
Yeah, you're applying it. You're applying it to the case study. So it's not a research paper. It's not a report. It's having that case study, and this is how I would respond to this client. This is how I would work in this kind of environment. This is what I would do. So it's think of application, not theory, not research. This is application.
The stages of development, that sort of lifespans class is really important.
Do you feel like, I feel like somebody said this last year, and I'm not sure I'm being accurate, but I think we are all consumed with like, how many do I have to answer to pass? I think if you do that, you can trick yourself into, it's again, if you don't write anything, it's an automatic 0, but if you write a little accurate knowledge about something, it can bump up your point value and balance another one. You know, because there's going to be a couple that you just hit spot on and get, 9 out of 9 or whatever, but I think we psych ourselves into going out like, how much do I have to do to pass? And just, that's why you collaborate almost everything you do with social workers, is because somebody else knows a little bit more and you're going to shine in other areas.
To sort of,
That's a good point.
yeah, to piggyback on that a little bit, I think there were a couple where halfway through the question, I kind of thought to myself, I think I actually chose the wrong person because there's going to be lots of different clients in your scenario. So it's not just one client. There will be lots of people described, and you can choose who your client's going to be that you're describing. And I think there were a couple of times when I kind of thought, oh gosh, I wish if I'd chosen this person, it was such a clear ethical dilemma or whatever. I'm completely making up that part, but and part of me was tempted to sort of go back and rethink it, and I am so glad I did not do that. And so I would actually say that is some good advice, is to not, if you think that halfway through your answer I could have gone in a different direction, don't go in that, don't just decide to change it and go in a new direction. I mean,
Unless your
you
answer
think
is
they're
actually wrong.
That's true, that's a good point.
Unless you really,
But if you are
think your
supporting,
answer's wrong.
if you just think like, oh, there could have been a better way to go about this, don't change your answer. Just stick with what you're doing.
The fact of the matter is, there may have been a better way, but there's still, you could still do something, like we said, there's 2 ways to do, there's more than one way to
there's
answer a
lots of ways,
question,
yeah.
so don't panic and just kind of trust yourself.
Yeah, talking knowledgeably about the wrong client in the case study versus saying a lot of not very much accurate information about the right client is, that it's a very different kind of deal. And you only have a finite amount of energy, so if you're going to put your energy towards something and getting ready for the comps, don't let it be what the number, how many you have to get right or, what it's going to take to pass. Put that energy toward just making sure you feel confident and that you know the basic concepts.
Are there any more questions before we conclude?
I do have a quick question. So when you're going to submit, like you've done your comps and you've done amazing, and you're going to submit it, is that an easy process, or does it kind of take a few attempts to get it through?
So let's reword that so they can hear it. So yeah, the question is about how you submitting, and if submitting is easy or if there are some complications. I think we better let Monica Ernest answer that one, because she's the one. She had a bit of a complication.
I only called the dean of the school in UT to finally get Blackboard timed out on me. Yeah, so I was freaking out. I was calling the Nashville connection, and that person wasn't picking up their phone. So I just called Knoxville. I said, all righty, let's just call and see who's going to answer. So I said, it's 5 minutes before it's supposed to be the deadline. I know there's Eastern time, Central time, it doesn't matter. It's 5 minutes before. So, and she said, just calm down. Try to resubmit it again. And so within a few minutes, it finally went through. I thought, oh no, this is not happening. So I would maybe set a timer that tells you, 20 minutes beforehand, refresh your Blackboard page, make sure you got,
And that speaks to why it's probably good to do, as Catherine was saying, leaving a chunk at the end, just like you left a chunk at the beginning, because that last 40 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever is a good time to just clean up, make sure everything is answered to your liking, refresh Blackboard. It gives you some wiggle room. Don't just say, oh, well, I have half an hour left, let me just rewrite question 2.
Right.
You need that wiggle room. You want that to be there so that you can ensure everything is exactly as you want it. Make sure there's any technical issues. We also kept I think Katie's number right now, we had all the numbers right next to us in case something did happen, so that's another good thing to do, just be but just leave yourself that wiggle room at the end.
And I think you don't have to be on the internet the whole time.
No.
Like, once you
No.
open the question, you don't,
Save it to your own.
You can save
yeah,
it to
save it to
your
your
own.
desktop, and you can work with that instead of,
But I actually, I emailed, somebody, I don't even know where, maybe it said it on the directions, but you email it also if you want to this person.
Just to be
to
safe.
that Mary Rogie person, I think, is it the same?
Yeah. If you're one of those, high anxiety, which most of us
Yeah.
are, so.
All of us.
Like 3 hours later, once my group got together to discuss, they were all saying they had emailed it to her, and I was like, I didn't do that. What if I didn't get it? What if it? So I called her at like 9, and she was like, I got it. It's fine. I would have told, so she'll let you know if it doesn't, if they don't get it, they let you know that they don't have it.
You'll get it.
I think she actually called me
One
baby.
way or
I think
another.
she was like, baby, calm down. I wouldn't be able to. Thank you, lady. I don't know. Sorry.
That's a good question.
Any other?
What's Mary Rogie's contact?
It's in that original packet that you got, all that stuff, or on Blackboard.
And you'll get an email just the week of to go over all the instructions again.
You're gonna get a lot of emails,
Yeah.
a lot of instructions.
But really, just take a deep breath and send off some that.
You've all made it this far, you've made it so far. 26 miles of a marathon, you're at mile 25. This is the last mile. It seems like the hardest, when you're running uphill, but you'll get to the day, you'll get to it. Jennifer made a really good point. I'm glad you highlighted that because it's hard to say they gave me my comp back. She didn't fail. They handed it back to me and said, do this over, and here's where you missed the mark. That's a big difference than them saying to you, you plagiarized and that's why you failed. Better to be in your own words and they're like, what the hell is this thing? They will say, what the hell was this? Do it again and turn it back in. That's way better than trying to search for stuff to insert. And that's where, again, that's an automatic. People have, I'm gonna tell
Don't
you.
Google anything.
What
while
about
you're doing it.
definitions of a word? Just like a 3-sentence long.
If you don't know what it means,
I
then
don't-
probably
yeah.
don't use it.
If
There's enough
it's
information.
not coming out of your head, don't do it.
Don't.
Yeah, because truly, if you Google something and put it in there, it's gonna know exactly what website you
Yeah.
found it on when
Don't
it
do
goes
that.
through the search. The search will even show you, it tells you exactly which words out of your essay
For
were
a match.
a match to someone else's essay.
Yeah.
And obviously, they're gonna be a lot because we all are gonna be using psychosocial.
Yeah.
But it will even know. I remember looking at my test and when I got it back and it's saying this, these 5 words matched someone else's. And
you
you're
didn't
like,
fail or anything.
no.
Oh.
And they won't they understand that there will be, but I'm just saying that's how sensitive it is.
Y'all are all coming from the same program. They're going to be overlap, right?
Yeah.
Some people study together, some people haven't, and you're still going to use a lot of the same jargon, the same words, a lot of the same concepts, and that's expected. That means you're doing it well, actually, right?
Yeah.
That means you're on the right page. But yeah, collaborate. That's great. Or you know it. We all share knowledge. But yeah, no Google. Don't use other people's words because it does pick up that. And you'll have a certain percentage. Everyone does pretty much when you're writing a paper or doing the comps. Because we're all using the same information, to a certain extent. And so that's going to be, that percentage will be high, there'll be some overlap, but just make sure it's not Googled or cited or anything like that. It's all coming from the clinician's mind and you.
If you get a question wrong, you'll have a chance to do the question again. You'll have plenty enough time. You can talk to a professor about the question, get their feedback, talk to your classmates, get their feedback about a question. You can redo the question and resubmit. But if you plagiarize, they'll throw you out of school. So no question wrong, then you can do it again. But if you plagiarize, you can possibly get in really, really serious trouble. So don't plagiarize.
And
do not plagiarize.
Keep in mind, this is not to weed you out. That's what research was for. They want you to succeed in this. This is not a trick to see who can't hack it as
And
a
in
social
4
worker.
months, when you take the LMSW exam and you're doing this again and feeling a little nervous, it's the same thing. The whole idea is for you to pass. They don't want you to fail.
Yeah.
This is meant to be passed. This is meant to give you the ability to go on and graduate and be a social worker.
Cleansing breath.